Now call this meeting of the Fletcher Planning Board to order. First item on the agenda is public input. If anybody has anything they want to speak to the board about, there's opportunity now. There's also another one at the end of the meeting. And if you want to speak to the board, come up to the podium. If not, the next item on the agenda is election of chair and vice chair and the introduction of new members. And at this time, I'd like to recognize our referral planning director.
Well, good evening, everybody. Definitely got some new faces. As we've been emailing with you, we had a very quick series of vacancies come about, and since our meeting schedule has been a little bit more not regular, it came about all so fast that here we are with some new faces that you haven't met yet. To my left is Mr. Jeff Groh. Mr. Groh was appointed as an at-large seat last night. Lee Bowser, who was brought in to fill the District 2 seat, and Dr. James Brookman, who was picked to fill the other at-large vacancy. I'll step back in just a second, let them introduce themselves if they'd like. I think I'm glad everybody got here early. It looked like y'all got to introduce yourselves to each other.
Sure.
I just appreciate having the full board with us tonight, given the case we have on the agenda this evening, and we'll look forward to getting to know each other as we move forward. So I did just want to make a note on the beginning of this item. It said farewell to Pat Clark, who has been on with us since, I forget exactly what year she said, I think it was around 1995, but Pat did decide not to seek reappointed. I had invited her here just since she didn't get a proper farewell, and she wasn't able to make it tonight. I told her to come in a future meeting to say sayonara, and she'll be invited to council next month for a more formal recognition for many years of service to the town. So just want to say thanks to Pat to help out on the record. And yes, so as we do with the first meeting of every calendar year, I'll turn it back over. We technically need to elect chair and vice chair for both the functions of the Zoning Board of Adjustments and chair of Planning Board and vice chair of Planning Board. Would suggest you start with the Zoning Board of Adjustments. One note about Zoning Board of Adjustments, given that we don't frequently operate with that function, is that I'll remind you that when we do have Zoning Board of Adjustment functions, that operates with 6 members as the membership with 2 alternates. George, you were currently an alternate for the Zoning Board of Adjustments. Pat Clark was the other alternate, so we need to select one more person from the membership that would be technically the alternate to the Zoning Board of Adjustment. And I would just say that can't be Dwayne because he is the EDJ rep, and we need that representation on there. So that being said, I'll be available for questions and let you.
I had a quick question. The 2 are at large. Would you tell us what district they're in?
Yes, sorry. Jeff Groh is an at-large member that comes out of District 2, and Dr. Brookman is out of District 1.
District 1. Okay.
And
at some point, you may become the District 1 representative. That's happened before that. Instead of, if we have trouble getting applicants, sometimes we have to put at large so we can broaden the area of applicants.
I will say a piece, I'll wait till the end tonight to talk a little bit about another item that came up very last minute yesterday that relates to membership and that process too. So, and it actually occurred to me I was inviting the new members to introduce themselves. But
sure.
If you'd like to do that first.
I would like to do that first, and then I'll let the regular board members introduce themselves also. We'll start on this and go this way.
Good evening. Can you all hear me in the back? Because I have a pretty good broadcast voice, because that was my major at The Ohio State University a few years back. I've been a resident of Fletcher for 15, 16 years. I'm a veteran of the U.S. Air Force, served during the Vietnam era, but not in Vietnam. I have a BA in journalism / public relations from the Ohio State University in 1975. I have a PhD in biblical studies and theology, 2009, from the Minnesota Graduate School of Theology. After graduating from Ohio State, I worked as an account executive at a private public relations agency in Columbus, Ohio. I then served as the public information officer for the City of Columbus Department of Development, which had 3 divisions, the Division of Planning, Zoning, and Code Enforcement. And we had about 360 employees in that department. I moved to Palm Beach County, Florida in 1980, where I was co-founder of Brigham Construction. I was a state licensed general contractor, and we employed at our peak about 165 people and had over 100 people on the payroll for a number of years before and after that. We focused primarily on commercial and residential construction, chiefly shopping plazas, shops, restaurants in the commercial sector, and we built single-family and multifamily housing. After moving to Western North Carolina in 1987, I held a North Carolina residential contractor's license and later a North Carolina real estate broker's license. I let both of them lapse sometime after I had founded Stone Kingdom Ministries, which I've been in full-time work since 1991. But in recent years, I have become very concerned about the direction of our country, and I figured that maybe I should start at my house and in my own community. So I began to get active in local politics and then noticed the vacancy on the board and thought, I think I can contribute in that way. So I'm glad to be here and looking forward to working with you all.
We're glad to have you. We're certainly proud to have you on the board. Thank you for your service. I am also a veteran. Quick question. Were you ever stationed on Lowry Air Force Base in Denver?
No.
I spent time there. I was in the Army, but I spent time on Air Force Base, and so
I got to go to the good places. I was in radar repair, and I went to Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and from there to Alaska. I was being a little sarcastic.
Yeah, that's got to be. I've got to
But I learned later it was by God's grace I got sent to nowhere, Alaska, because the other alternative was Vietnam, where if you're in radar,
Right.
you're a top target.
That's exactly right. You've got a crosshair on you. And I'm very familiar with Alaska. My nephew's over there in the Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, and
You bet.
we're glad to have you here. And we'll get to the other ones now. Yeah, you.
Lee Godwin, I've been in Fletcher for 6 years. I've been in the Charlotte area for around 30. I was active in real estate for 15 years. I had my own company for 8. I was on the Troutman Town Council for 8 years. I was mayor pro tem for 3. I was also in multiple regional development groups, the Charlotte Regional. So I have some experience with developments and such. And similar to you, I've decided, I've been sitting on the sidelines for a while, and decided to, get back in and contribute because you have to fix your own area first. And then hopefully it just migrates out and you can help others. And I'm looking forward to contributing and doing whatever I can. And I was in the Army, so just put that out there.
Thank you for your service. Always welcome, veterans.
Sorry about the train.
Yeah. We can't do much about the training. This is
I forgot to get that rescheduled.
today. Get to see all the graffiti, all the artwork that's being done. Anyway, thank you so much.
Good evening, folks. My name is Jeff Groh, and I have been in North Carolina since about early 2015. So I represent the growth that's coming here to Fletcher and live in Brooklyn Village. I've been there since late 2017. So yeah, I grew up in Ohio, spent 30 years in industry in a whole variety of different roles in sales and marketing, and I'm an engineer by training. Spent very little time actually as a practicing engineer. The latter part of my career in management, primarily in innovation management, technology management. Left corporate America in 2012, moved to North Carolina in 2015. During that period of time, started a consulting business. I still have that company here, though I really only have one major client that I work with, an analytical instrument company that supplies products to the cement concrete industry, interestingly enough. And then I also have another business that I co-own based out of South Carolina that we manufacture some specialty products to the poultry industry. So two
Different.
totally different things, which is fine with me. I love doing lots of different things, which is why I'm here. Always enjoy learning new things. I have absolutely no experience with this kind of thing, so be patient with me as I ask lots of stupid questions potentially. Like the others, you know, I look at this as a opportunity to give back to the community. I've been very blessed in my life. I have the time now, the financial resources to split my time between my businesses and these kind of activities. And so, yeah, I look forward to working and learning from all of you.
Well, thank you so much for volunteering to do this, and don't think twice about experience. None of us here had experience when we started. And now, Joe and I and Wayne and Grace, we probably have 50 years total experience. And we didn't know, so when we started out, we had to go to workshops on the weekend too and learn how to do this. So don't think any, these other two fellows, they overkill with experience. They're overqualified. They probably, we will have to learn from them how to do this. But we're certainly glad to have all of it, because we struggle sometimes to get people to do this. At this time, I'd like to introduce the board. Grace, you can go first if you want, and let these guys know.
My name is Grace Deal. I'm a retired educator, but I did spend an interesting 5 years, a number of years ago, as clerk to the Board of County Commissioners in another county in North Carolina. So I realize that's where the rubber meets the road, and it serves a very important function. So I had a taste of what serving on a board like this would be like.
And we're glad that you're here, Grace. Thank you so much. Go on ahead, Joe.
My name is Joe Candy. I grew up and lived in this area, but in 2002 I moved here to Fletcher. One of the best things I ever did. Really like it here at Fletcher, a lot of people in the town. I went to Brevard College, graduated from there in 1960, and went on to Western Carolina, graduated in 62 in pre-engineering from Brevard. And I went into manufacturing, which was about my background and my career. And in 1977, I left management of General Electric and went and built houses for a builder. And between what I built here for him, I built 500 houses for him in 5 years. And then went business for myself, built well over 600 houses. Tried to retire in 97, but I ended up working for Home Depot for 16. Now I'm here for my son in the transportation business. All I've done is just change jobs. So I've enjoyed being on the board. Glad to help you guys. I can't or anything.
Yeah, we look to the wisdom of the older people to help us out. I'm getting up there myself. My name is George Clayton. I've been on this board over 27 years, and all but the first year I've been the chairman, and I've been so blessed that the board has confidence in me to allow me to do this long. And sometimes you think about it, you do something that long, so well, I haven't got promoted. You're still doing the same thing after the, And the chances for me to move on just didn't happen, and so I've been here this long and been glad that I could do it. I'm fifth generation to live in Fletcher. My son is the sixth generation of Claytons to live here in this community, and before that, our family came from Transylvania County. So we've been in western North Carolina probably close to 200 years, and I found a place that I could do something for the town, and I'm so grateful they allowed me to do it. But I'll do it as long as I physically am able. And I'm getting old, like I never dreamed I'd live to be this old, but I'm here doing it, and I'll do it as long as I can. And I'm grateful that the town has given me this opportunity. And next, I'd like to introduce Dwayne. He's the last one of our older members.
Like I said, my name is Dwayne Jim. I've lived in Fletcher probably a short time, about 85 years. So I know a pretty good history of it. I'm a graduate of Fletcher High School, which no longer exists. I graduated and come out of the Air Force at what is now AV Tech. It wasn't AV Tech at the time. It was associate's equivalent of associate's degree in electronics. Retired from Eaton Cutler Hammer, I don't know, 20 years ago, I guess. So I've been on board, I don't know how many years, I've been counting the years I've been on the board, but it's been several. So I've seen Fletcher grow from no red light to about, 15 of them. So I've been here a while, and enjoy living here, I reckon, but it has changed. And I've been a part of that change, I guess.
I'd like to thank the board members that have been on this board, and we welcome you new guys, and thank you so much for your service to the county and to the town of Fletcher. I think that we both can learn from each other. Y'all have so much to bring to the table that I think we can learn from you, and I'll be glad to help any of you any way that I can. You can call me anytime if you got questions or something you want to know about. I'll be glad to answer. But thank you so much for your service here. I guess the next thing we need to do is to accept nominations for chair and vice chair of the zoning board of adjustment. And while we're doing that, we're going to have one person to volunteer to be a alternate for the ZBA. And if there are volunteers, y'all be thinking about if you want to do that. And we don't have to vote on that. So,
And basically, for the alternates would come to the meeting that night. They would just be probably out here in the office, out in the audience, unless you needed to sit for a member who was absent that night. So there are very specific quorum requirements and supermajority vote requirements for ZBA actions, which is why that's structured a little bit.
That's one of the reasons I volunteered to be an alternate. I don't think it's a conflict of interest, but I do think it's kind of, in a small town, you have the writers of the ordinances, and then you have another group that's the interpreter. And to have that as the same, to me, have it as the same group, to me seemed a little odd. So I wanted to step down and not really be part of the ZBA, but it's not really a conflict, but to me it is strange that this board would work on the ordinances and then another group would interpret that without having hands-on. But the way it works now, the boards are combined. So one of you three guys certainly, or even, well, Dwayne could, I guess, if he wanted to.
Well, for ZBA representation, we do require, it is required to have an ETJ rep as part of that, the deliberate.
So he couldn't be the
So
alternate.
Dwayne would, sorry, Dwayne.
You're stuck. You could be the alternate, but anyway, we have to have one, so one of you three will be that. But right now, we take nominations for the chair and vice chair of the ZBA. I guess the vice chair would be first. We'll do it that way. Do I have nominations? All right. Is there any other nominations that you want to bring before the board? If not, no other nominations, so we'll vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. All right.
Mr. Chairman, you might want to point out, I currently hold that position.
Yes, she has held that, actually probably is, when the ZBA was combined with the planning board, you've held it that long since that day. Anyway, thank you so much. I guess you'll be the vice chair until you decide not to. But anyway, let's take nominations for the chair of the zoning board of adjustment now.
I'd like to nominate Joe.
Joe currently serves as the chair. Are there any other nominations for the chair of the zoning board of adjustment? If not, all those in favor of Joe continuing doing it, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The nomination carries. You get to be the chair of the ZBA. Well, thank you for the service you've given us in the past. The next election for the chair and vice chair, we'll do the vice chair first. Right now, Joe is the vice chair of this board, the planning board. Are there nominations for that position?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would like to propose that, make the motion that you remain as chairman and Joe remains as vice chair.
And we've done that in the past. If there are no objections or that's satisfactory with you guys, we'll do it that way. We'll combine the nomination of chair and vice chair, and then it will remain like it is if we vote that way. So all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Joe and I will be chair, vice chair. Again, thank you so much for the confidence in us doing that. And I do appreciate that. I really do. I guess that's it for the election of chair and vice chair. Have you got anything you wanted to add, Eric?
No, sir, I believe that covered it. Oh, yes, you still need to move on to the minutes, sorry.
Yeah, do we need to volunteer for the alternate right now, or is it something that we can do later?
It would be helpful just for the notes if you go ahead and select that.
Well,
Appreciate it.
I don't know how to, out of the three, first one to want to, if all three of you want to do it, or I don't know how you would.
I volunteer.
Okay. You guys, if you have, that's fine. We've got a volunteer, and
If you'd like, this could become something, we haven't done it this way in the past, but it could be something like with the chair, vice chair elections, we can revisit this on an annual basis.
right, we don't have to have the same alternate, but I would prefer if I didn't have to do it, and, you know, to me, it's a choice I made. But anyway, if you two guys in the future agree, if you want to be an alternate later, y'all can work it out between yourselves.
The city members know that we have very little volume of ZBA submittals, so it's not.
You know, the ZBA rarely has a meeting. When they do, it's a little more, it's quasi-judicial, it's very official, and it's got to be done properly, and it's not as casual as this board, but it is on the legal side. A lot of times it turns into things that have to be done legally, and the town attorney is here a lot of times. So it's a different animal altogether, but the ZBA is something that we can answer any questions and help you guys with later because we rarely have one of those meetings. Anyway, thank you so much. Next item on the agenda is approval of minutes, corrections, additions, and deletions. Do I have a motion to approve minutes? It's been moved and second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The motion carries. The next item on the agenda is a discussion and possible recommendation regarding a conditional zoning application for 3122 Hendersonville Road and 2 adjoining parcels for a proposed multifamily development that would be part of a larger mixed-use development. The number is CZ number 2022-01. At this time, I'd like to recognize Eric Groh, our planning director.
Okay, thank you again, everybody, and I appreciate all that bit of extra housekeeping work you had this evening too. So, that being said, the agenda item for you tonight, we've actually broken up into 2 separate action items. That'll be items number 3 and number 4. We will get through this number 3 first, which is the request for the conditional zoning consideration, and then move on to the Heart of Fletcher overlay review part of the discussion, which would apply to the entire development. So, again, George, you referenced conditional zoning application number 2022-01 has been received from Long Shoals Partners, LLC. The applicant is proposing a multifamily residential development that would consist of 87 units on 5.4 acres of land located off of Hendersonville Road. For the record, I do need to read these parcel numbers just into the record. The PIN numbers associated with this request are 9653-73-0234, which is 3122 Hendersonville Road. Second parcel is 9653-63-7349, which is 3086 Hendersonville Road. And the final parcel is 9653-63-7418, which is 3056 Hendersonville Road. Just for visual references, the property being discussed begins just past the Seasons apartment complex, where you see that old brick house standing in the center of the field. Adjoining that is the old stone house, which has actually been a previous rezoning request some years ago. And then the old dry cleaners are the 3 properties being talked about tonight. The current zoning of those properties is C1 along the Highway 25 corridor portion and R2. For this part of the overall development, the applicant is seeking a zoning for these 3 properties as referenced on the site plan. It shows up on the color rendering best, where you see kind of a dividing line between the residential and commercial portions. Basically, if approved, this will have a straight line drawn where the northern section, where the residential would be zoned Neighborhood Business District, or NBD for short, in order to allow this multifamily residential use, which does allow up to 16 units an acre. These properties are also located within the Heart of Fletcher overlay, which I mentioned a moment ago, and the portion of the property subject to the conditional zoning request is located within a sub-precinct of this overlay. It's referred to as Town Center Housing East, which those guidelines were established, I think, around 2012 or 2013, and for this section did envision a density of up to 16 units per acre. Again, the residential development that's being proposed is part of a larger development that was submitted that includes this commercial portion along the Highway 25 frontage. We'll get to that in item 4 in a few minutes. Moving on, I won't read you the entire memo. You have this memo in your packet. I will touch on a few points where I added some supplemental notes that were in your packet as well. Some redundancy, forgive me on that. But so again, this is while not, I was going to make a note saying that while not specifically zoned for multifamily uses, this portion again was in the Heart of Fletcher overlay that was identified for the higher density. Those of you on the board in 2018 will remember the process where we actually took residential off the table in our C2 zoning district, kind of on the fringe areas out up towards Airport Road. And we also took it off the table in the actual C1 zoning district. That was to largely preserve that direct Highway 25 frontage for the commercial infill development that we're seeing as part of that, the overall site plan. It did envision these two little pockets within the overlay. One is this town center housing east. As I mentioned, there's another section on the opposite side of Highway 25 that was envisioned for up to 8 units an acre. But those are really the only two pockets of land in town left that were largely viewed as potential for the higher density. So if approved, as you know, we are often the first agency that kicks off the review process on a project like this. If approved, and ultimately you guys will make a recommendation to council on the conditional zoning portion, it will go to public hearing in front of council probably in April. We would introduce the project to them in March, set public hearing for April. But if approved, then the project would go into their full engineering mode, and they would be submitting to Hendersonville for the water approval, MSD for sewer, Henderson County for stormwater, building, fire code compliance, and NCDOT for driveway permitting and any required traffic impact analysis. I think that developers and their engineering team have had some preliminary conversations about traffic and whatnot, and we'll speak a bit more to that. So also in your packet, the multifamily structures, there are renderings. There is an elevation drawing. When I introduced them, I think they have some color handout for you of the rendering that shows up a little better than the elevation drawings in your packet. And the residential portion would be to the rear of the development, not directly on Highway 25 corridor. The development includes a clubhouse, pool area with a loop trail, picnic area that overall would meet the town's requirement for the recreation areas outlined in our Article 7. The plan shows the various parking associated with the development. It shows the various landscape requirements being met from street trees, parking lot trees, and the required landscape buffers where this development would abut the adjoining single-family residential, primarily the Baldwin Circle properties that are on the map here. You can see all this on the color version of the site plan in your packet, a little better than the black and white versions. This residential development would not front any existing nor create any new public streets, so there would not be any new street fronting sidewalks required, obviously, and again, we'll have a network of internal sidewalks. Also in this narrative, I outlined a section that we frequently cut and paste from Article 15 that are just generally the criteria that are just very generally considered as part of any conditional zoning application. This section is actually lifted from the special use permit section, but the criteria are the same for conditional zoning. And those have to do with receipt of the application. There are very general standards about as it relates to the development would not adverse the health or safety of persons in the neighborhood, detrimental to public welfare, injurious to the property or public improvements in the neighborhood. I won't read that whole list because it's quite a long thing, but it's basically a section of the ordinance directly cut and pasted. And ultimately, when this gets to council, as they deliberate on this more formally in the public hearing, basically any development like this would have to have a plan consistency statement where approval would largely be use plan and our zoning code. So, that being said, I'll pause to see if you have any initial questions for me. I will say that the development team is with us tonight. He's Marty Cocott, the engineer. We met Marty on a previous submittal a few years ago. Sean Blatten from Stantec, and Mr. Schweissgood. Thank you all for being here tonight. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Marty for his introduction of it. And I'll pause if you have any initial questions for me first, or if you'd like to invite Marty up first.
All right, any questions for Eric? If not, we'll move on. Thank you, Eric.
Good evening. Again, my name is Marty Cocott with Stantec Engineering, and I have been before the board before. I'm here to present and talk to you about this project tonight. But first, I wanted to congratulate the new board members this evening. You got big shoes to fill. It can be a fun job, but I'm sure you're probably aware of it can also be a challenging job. Second, I'd like to congratulate the returning members. You guys have served for a long time, and it's evident, and the improvements you make to the town are noticeable. In my 23 years of living in the Asheville area, I've seen Fletcher grow, and the challenges that growth brings and the benefits that growth brings both. So tonight I'm here to sort of present this project, and I wanted to sort of tell you how the design of the project evolved. Okay, the first thing we did was sit down and talk about what land was available that we were going to try to acquire. We being the ownership group, Long Shoals Partners, who Joseph Schweissgood is here representing them this evening. Okay. The next thing we did was come and sit down with Eric Ruffin. Okay. Eric's been just a workhorse of knowledge as far as the town center housing east area, what things were available, in other words, permitted to be built, and the process for rezoning into a multifamily and a mixed-use idea. Now, the idea of the entire development is to create a mixed-use center of both commercial uses and workforce housing, okay? And the reason we went with the workforce housing is we know, number one, that it's lacking in the Henderson County area and the Fletcher area, okay? So we thought it would be important to incorporate that. Now that does two things. It allows folks to live potentially closer to where they work, be able to walk to a shopping center and get a bite to eat perhaps, or perhaps their office location could be there, or do some shopping in the retail venue without getting into an automobile and getting out in the commercial corridor. So I want to tell you a little bit about the project as I throw my scale around. I bring this as a pointer to be able to point and talk about the project, but at the same time, you have to bear with me. I will speak loud. I was raised that way because I was one of 7 children that was the middle child, so you had to speak up to be heard. So I'm pretty good at speaking up. Sometimes folks put it down, and I get it. I get excited. I enjoy engineering. I enjoy design. And we try to think about all of the different design facets. Now, the plans you see before you tonight are conceptual, what we call conceptual and schematic. That means that every little detail hasn't been figured out, but it's been figured out enough to give thoughts to the process of traffic, access, parking, circulation patterns, common open space. What areas do you try to preserve on the site? You know, the wooded areas, the stormwater. How does water flow through the site, on the site? You know, so we're already thinking from a schematic level on how to address the challenges of development. It's never easy, and change is never easy. But if you stick with the engineering principles and smart design principles, you can achieve the balance between development and the land. You know, the land kind of dictates where the water's going to run and go. And you'll notice that on our plans, Baldwin Circle is the single-family residential community off to the north of our site, okay? So what we tried to do is to, if you went and visited the site and you walked along that edge, there's an existing sewer easement and there's a large creek that just drops down about 20, 25 feet, then climbs back up the hill, and it's pretty wooded in those areas. So on that side, we also included, as Eric indicated, we meet the required and additional 20-foot landscape buffer to try to buffer it against the residential communities, okay? I'm going to just tell you a little bit about the buildings, and you'll see 5 different multifamily buildings, okay? The site would have to be graded, as all multifamily sites do. When you're putting in a large footprint, in order to have ADA access and a 5% parking lot throughout the middle of the site, you have to grade the sites. We live in the mountains, and 5% is a tough grade to achieve when everything around you is 10%, 15%, 20, 25%, 30%. I don't ever like to go above the 30% threshold in single-family dwellings, because at that point you start losing the economy of scale, and your footprint has to expand, and there's more grading involved. So we laid this out with a 5% parking lot in the middle with a cluster of residential buildings around. And you'll note that there is multifamily adjacent to us and a multifamily parcel behind us. So we tried to tuck the multifamily behind the commercial corridor, which is Hendersonville Road, and everybody knows what Hendersonville Road is. Large commercial car corridor, traffic volume increases during the day, increases on the night coming home. Traffic is always a concern. It's something that we try to think about in the approval process. So what we did was we created, again, trying to preserve the areas along the residential components, but also take advantage of this back parcel clustered and surrounded on 2 of the 3 sides by multifamily. This building would have 15 units, and the other 4 buildings would have a total of 18 units. And 18 units, 6 units per floor, times 3. They're 3-story buildings, okay? This building, 5 units per floor, times 3, 15, okay? Add those up, it's 87 units. Right now, the stormwater leaves the site through this creek that runs along this left edge boundary, or the northern boundary of the site. This area on the back half of the site is wooded right now. We would have to clear this area around the 3-story, 15 unit per floor, 15 unit residential. But we're trying to preserve the wooded area behind those buildings, okay? And preserve open space. we are required to provide open space. What's the open space for? When you live here, you want to be able to get outside, walk your dog like folks do, go sit in a park bench, go do things like that, where you can kind of escape the inside on a nice day, get outside. Nobody likes a big sea of asphalt. We're trying to present opportunities for open space on the site, as is required by the town regulations, okay? We provided a little bit more open space than is required by the town regulations. Nothing to brag about, but it's just a little bit. When you have an opportunity, you want to try to take advantage of that. So we have 87 units clustered in the back of the project, up against the commercial quarter up front, that we transitioned from commercial uses to sort of an office kind of environment in a couple of the buildings. And again, the plan up front is very conceptual still. It's likely to evolve and change, okay? And the things that we were thinking about is capturing and treating stormwater under the parking lots in what we call infiltration areas. We collect the stormwater, we take the runoff from the first inch of rainfall. Now, why the first inch? That's the air, that's the volume of water that when, if ever it hasn't rained in a while downtown and then you see it rain really hard in the summer thunderstorm, that's where it picks up all of the oil, heavy metals, debris, any kind of sediment or trash. That's what we collect. That's the volume of water that we treat and allow it to infiltrate back into the water table in the ground, okay? The other excess rainfall, when you have a bigger storm event, okay, we collect that volume and we hold it and we do what's called detention. We hold it underground in chambers or in pipes, and then we meter the outflow of that, so that the outflow might have an orifice or weir or combination structure that allows it to meter the outflow to constrain the rate that the water leaves the site. So before development, you have grass and homes or that old structure that's up there and some of those structures that are in the front. After development, you're going to have multifamily and commercial buildings. Overall, we treat that first inch of rainfall, so you get the water quality component, then you get the water quantity component. We capture and treat the 10-year storm event, hold it back, and release it at the pre-developed rate. So that the neighbors that experience flooding, and I know there's some downstream because I've been called out on engineering things to go evaluate their property and make recommendations to them on how to stabilize their sites better. We capture, treat, and release that volume of water at the pre-developed rate, so there's not that big impact. Now, if you get a 50-year storm event, like we did in the fall, a bunch of rain, what you do is it helps the situation. It doesn't remedy everything. You can't capture that volume of water under the ground. So you have to make the decisions to make the design as best you can, meter the flow that's required in Henderson County, and Natalie, Barry, and I are very well acquainted. We've worked for years together at this point. So that is essentially what we do with the site. That is what is before you. We are here tonight because, as Eric said, this is the heart of Fletcher area on the commercial up front, which we're not asking for rezoning on. The C1 district there, anything that's proposed is what's under the current zoning. And the back portion, which is zoned residential 2, or R2, that is where we are asking for the neighborhood business, the neighborhood business district. Is NBD is the magic term that we've been tossing around. The NBD development in the back to support the multifamily that we're proposing. We are not exceeding the 16 dwelling units per acre per the regulations. So that is how we tailored the site around what's there. Now, I also brought a couple other displays that you have in your little packet, but I prefer to bring these to show you. This is what we intend the buildings to look like, okay? To give you an idea of what you're going to see visually when you go onto the site. The one on the top is the multifamily building, a 3-story, that one's an 18-unit building, and you can see that it's laid out with a variety of different materials to break up the surface and provide, you know, a good visual site, okay? And the one on the bottom is what's proposed up front, sort of the retail environment up front. And we thought it'd be important to show you that the materials kind of blend from front to back on the site so you could get just a general feel. Now the colors represent the same materials, and this is that pebble dash that you've heard about, like in the Biltmore area, if you've ever been to the Biltmore Estate, which I'm sure you have, or Biltmore Village, they use that pebble dash exclusively, and that's what's proposed here, is a similar type look with, you know, not a stucco environment, but more of a pebble dash type look. And we're working with the architect, Chris German, and he has prepared these building elevations to give you an idea conceptually of what the buildings should look like, or we intend them to look like, okay? Last but not least, I wanted to look at this rendering, which shows what we call sort of the master plan layout. And it's a color illustrative plan to give you an idea. That way you can recognize plantings, tree zones, areas that are grassed in between buildings, and then the pavement area and sidewalk areas which are impervious, okay? Those are the areas that they're hard surface, water runs off those. Those are the areas we try to collect. You know, when the water falls, the raindrops fall over here, it doesn't create a problem, it soaks into the ground. When the rainfall falls on the roofs and on these hard surfaces, that's the areas we focus on collecting, treating, and taking care of and reducing the discharge from. So that, in a nutshell, is the process. And this line, as Eric pointed out, is sort of the separation line between the NMB proposed back here and the commercial up front. And interestingly enough, this parcel is zoned residential with the exception of this little piece here that I'm going around. That piece was left commercial zoning from the earlier zoning, and that is sort of the only commercial piece that we're asking to zone to the NMB, NBD, NMB. See, I even messed up myself. So, but we're also going to have a pool and clubhouse and try to create a community where you can walk across and sit in a gazebo over here across the creek, and you know, try to create elements where folk can get outside and enjoy, but also the availability to walk. Now I know the issues, and that's why I wanted to talk about them a little bit, was traffic and stormwater. They're always the issues. You know, folks go, well, there's grading, land disturbance, traffic, and stormwater. Those are the things that jump up all the time when we're doing the projects. So what I did was try to get a little bit of knowledge about, I'm going to throw this down again, so sorry. Have a little bit of knowledge about the kind of traffic increase that this multifamily site under consideration for the rezoning would create. So what we do is we have access to traffic engineers at Stanford. So I had them base their 87-unit peak hour trips for the day, leaving the site, coming back to the site, as if the as if the commercial sections up front weren't there. So these are somewhat of an overestimate, in a sense, of the commercial and residential traffic that would leave the site. Now, the reason it's an overestimate is if there's a shop that's available or a restaurant that's available up front, folks are gonna walk, they're not gonna get in their car. So we assume that everybody in the multifamily section would be leaving the site to go to dinner, would be leaving the site to go to work. And that's what I mean by I say overestimate of the traffic. And you'll be interested to know that the 87 units create 369 daily trips. That's leaving and coming back home, okay? 369 trips on a major commercial corridor like Hendersonville Road, okay? Based on my experience working with traffic and working with the DOT, this would not trigger a traffic impact study. However, DOT, Fletcher, Henderson County, they make the call on this. We talk to them, we present our ideas on driveway access. We're proposing 2 main accesses or driveways back to the multifamily. Why is that a good thing? It's a good thing because of safety. One, if there's a problem with one entry, the other entry can be used. The fire department loves that. They can drive in, they can turn their truck around and drive back out. There's multiple ways to get in and out of the site. So safety becomes important too. We try to think about that in the layout of the site. So we've tried to think of all of the components at an early schematic conceptual stage that would make this project a good project and well received in the town of Fletcher. It is, again, as Eric said, it's in one of the areas that is left that will support a multifamily, which is one of the needs you guys have, okay? Again, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, and I'm sorry that I went a little bit longer than I wanted to, but I wanted to make sure that you understood how important the design is in doing a top-notch project for Fletcher would be for us, okay? It's important to us. Thank you.
Go ahead, Jim.
What is the volume of parking places in relation to the 87 units? For we know we got, most times, 2 cars with everybody.
Well, that's exactly what we're going to provide, is 2 parking spaces per unit, okay? Which means more than 1 for every bedroom, okay? Initially on the plan that you have before you, we created a little bit short of we provided 1 per bedroom. And Eric, in his infinite wisdom, said, Marty, I think you need to bump the parking up a little bit to try to make sure you're providing at least 2 per unit, okay? So with 87 units, that's what we have, 184 spaces.
On these back 3 units, I see it's the bulk of that parking area is parking spaces. Can you get a fire truck in there and turn it around with the cars?
Yes.
Parked in those spaces, because that seems to be all the time.
It does appear that way, but you do have to keep in mind that 1 inch is 50 feet. What we normally provide, and which is the town standard and city standards, is 24 feet of drive aisle in between parking spaces. And on the end here, what we do is we actually take what's called an SU-30 vehicle or a fire truck, and we will route it around that drive aisle to make sure that it can maneuver the turning radius and turn around without impact. Now, I say that, but I also brought up the 2 entrances or 2 egress areas to get in and out. And the reason we do that is everybody's experienced that as you're going somewhere and somebody decides that, well, they're just going to double park there in the street. And it creates a challenge if there's an emergency, okay? So what that 24 foot where that comes from is the North Carolina Building Code Appendix D requires that we provide at least 20 foot of clear path on a fire truck. And the reason is that they end up having to pass each other occasionally if there's a pumper truck involved or multiple responders to a fire. So you want to have the ability to bypass another fire truck. And so they're given 10-foot lanes of clear distance. We're providing essentially 12. Now, I can't teach people how to park. I've seen people that don't pull in their space all the way sometimes and things like that. But that's where we're given the 24 feet. We're required to have at least 20 foot of clear distance. When we feel like that's adequate, we can route the vehicles around. And this ultimately gets looked at by the fire marshals in the area. And of course, Fletcher, we know how involved the fire folks are with the review process. So.
Since you do have two entrances, y'all have not requested a traffic light. I know you mentioned the traffic study because of the impact, but do you see there may be a need for a traffic light there for the retail aspect of it? Because residential, usually rush hour is the traffic for the residential, but the retail would require more easily flowing time. And have you applied for an application for a traffic light or anything that would?
No, we have not. And what happens is we meet with DOT and we design these entrances, okay, to navigate off. And again, you guys know what we have here. Hendersonville Road is a 5-lane commercial corridor, okay? What DOT does is they look at it and they say, well, it's operating at level C. And you guys are going to introduce or induce so many trips per day. And that's why we start breaking it down to trips per day. There's peak hour, and there's peak hour in the morning when everybody's off to work. And there's peak hour in the evening when everybody's coming home, which I just drove through, I think. So on the way here. And what we do is we meet with DOT and present our data and the trip analysis, not just for the apartments, but for the commercial section up front. And we work with them to determine what's necessary here. Now, we know there's 2 lanes on each side with what we call a suicide lane down the middle. And that's where the folks make their left turns, pull off into the middle and turn left. So that's a good feature for a commercial corridor. The questions come when we do the full traffic impact analysis study at a certain point to determine what's warranted out here. DOT looks at our numbers and says, hey, it's going to operate pretty much the way it does, potentially. Or they come back with, well, you might not need a traffic light, but maybe we want to do a little bit of a lane widening to provide sort of a deceleration lane to get folks off Hendersonville Road. That's why we're in the schematic stage. That's because you don't want to finalize a plan and then go and meet with DOT and have to redo your plan over again. So what we try to do is determine what those volumes will be. DOT is involved in the process. Yeah. Again, it becomes counting cars and projecting traffic. And ultimately, DOT looks at it and makes a decision on the amount of cars you're inducing would require X, Y, and Z, or maybe just X, or maybe it has no significant impact on changing what they call the level of service that Hendersonville Road operates. You know, there are challenges further up and down the site where St. John comes in and intersects, and then there's a staggered intersection off it, and you know, there's plenty of work to do, and it never gets easier, and I know folks are concerned with traffic. We try to look at it and make sensible decisions. We can't redesign the world, and sometimes adding a traffic signal becomes an impediment to traffic. all of a sudden there's a new signal, and if it's not synchronized, and you get into these synchronization studies about, okay, the lights are green, then they all turn red, and everybody stops. And we've all been at lights before where you go up a light and stop, up a light and stop. And, you know, again, what we're trying to do is work with the experts, DOT, who owns and maintains the roadway, and you know, the folks in Fletcher, and of course Henderson County, and the traffic engineers that are smarter than I am as far as what is required. Now, I can draw and create turn lanes, things like that. The question is, are they warranted? Are they necessary? Do they create more problems than they fix? Okay, or remedy, I should say. Okay?
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, so on the schematic, first of all, point of clarification, those black, dark black lines, what are those on that?
And I'm not sure these,
Like on,
At the top, possibly at the
no, right here, these right here, this, like this line right here?
Those are retaining walls.
Retaining walls?
oh, those are retaining walls.
Okay. So the kind of the strip down between the apartments, but I guess that's where all the water runs in, right, from the parking. I mean, there's no option to, like you have kind of in the entrance to those 5 buildings where there's a strip of those 3 trees. There's no option for more trees down the center of that rather than just a big open parking lot between all those buildings.
Well, again, one of the things we've done is try to look at an actual building layout dimensionally, okay? And there are challenges on this site. And one of the challenges is the dimensional width from property line to property line. When we put in a 20-foot vegetated buffer at the back, maintain grading away from these existing, if you've been to the site, they have a retaining wall that runs along their site and a big slope embankment up to ours. And then as you get closer to the back, it reverses direction and goes down. So one of the things we look at is trying to position as best we can the site and the dimensional footprints, okay? It's a little deceiving because we are showing sidewalk around the parking areas, and what we've tried to do is cluster trees and break up the number of parking spaces in a row with vegetative trees, okay? So we've laid this out where there's a tree within 60 feet of every parking space on the site. And you do that for, you know, a visual barrier, but also trying to create a tree canopy that reduces the heat island effect of the sun constantly beating on the pavement, okay? So we've tried to cluster the buildings in an arrangement that provides connectivity along the building path around the perimeter, but unfortunately there's not a way to expand that parking lot and provide the amount of parking that's necessary for the multifamily site, or, as was talked about, emergency vehicle access through the parking lot. You know, we have essentially 2 24-foot lanes and then 18 feet of parking, 36 feet or 2 spaces wide, and then another 18 feet for parking, okay? And when you put that in there, it gets a little, we wanted to have the buildings that we needed, but you have to have the parking to support the buildings that you're proposing as well. So.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Coca,
Yes.
you said this is conceptual. The landscape improvement legend, the plantings include a lot of, when they're mature, very large trees with a huge canopy. And it's a very expensive plant.
Yes, it is. And again, what we did was create what we felt was a good and I'm not a landscape architect.
Well, it's a beautiful plant. I mean, it's not the knock out roses and mandalas like those places.
And I'm not saying there won't be any of those, but what we were trying to do is show you what we think a good variety of a tree mix would be. We like to use a tree species that is healthy, vigorous, and will grow a large canopy, in particular around the parking lots and things like that. Again, you know, when you plant a tree and it's 12 foot tall when you plant it, and it's somewhat smaller, it has to grow in. You know, if you were to walk the back of this site, there's some large trees that are still there. And we looked at the retaining wall in that dark line that looks like a magic marker. And the reason we did that and have a retaining wall is because we're trying to grade less of the area. Those walls are there to, one, support the building, which is flat, but it's also there to try to preserve any of the trees that are back there past it that we can save that are in good shape, kind of thing. But your observations about the trees are spot on. There's a variety, and some of them will be large trees. And the site, I think it's important to have some large trees on the site. Not to obstruct your view, but to act as a tree canopy coverage, okay? Because we're grading the site and we're creating a lot of impervious area.
Is there any option to impervious, like brick or any other material to use so it would not be impervious? Is there opportunity for that?
Well, and you know, I've been doing engineering for a lot of years. And if we only lived in eastern North Carolina down toward the coast where sandy soil is present, the impervious paving works just super down there because you take a gallon of water and you dump it in.
It doesn't freeze.
That's right. Now the challenges here are two things. The clay content of the soil, which doesn't allow the water to soak in as fast, okay? And yes, we've all seen the demonstrations, and I've seen them as an engineer, been invited to sites about how great the impervious pavers are, and this salesperson said, look what we did. She said, go, here, take this gallon of water and dump it. And I did. And then she said, here's another one. And I dumped it in the same spot. She said, what are you doing? I said, give me another one. And I dumped it in the same spot. And what happens is the water runs into the impervious paving. And the impervious paving, what it is it's a gravel mix of sandy type layer that's about 8 inches or 6 inches thick underneath the bricks that you see. Now the water goes into the bricks and it goes down through the soil and it gets on this hard surface that has to be able to support a fire truck, 75,000 pounds that's driving up and down the roadway, and it's hard as a rock under there. I don't care what you do to it, it has to be hard to support your vehicle. So what happened with those 3 or 4 gallons of water that I dumped out, ran under the ground and it came out at the driveway and I said, there it is, there's your impervious. So is it a good feature in the right application? Absolutely. The question is, what we're trying to do is capture it, hold it under the ground to give it more time to infiltrate the soil, which is the same principle. It's just sort of a different way to do it, underground in pipes that are perforated with gravel that create that volume of storage that you need to mitigate the runoff rates that are leaving the site. And I know all of those fancy terms that you spell out, and I like pervious pavers. The city of Asheville makes us do them, but I don't know that they're as effective. And then when you have rain and sleet and snow and ice, and then the plow comes through the parking lot and it pushes your pavers out, and it can create problems. So I try to use common sense as an engineer, but common materials that may be more effective than, you know, having a brick sidewalks perhaps might be an alternative, and doing things like that, where you feel those elements, and it's a softer design, but it's not as, let's say, labor intensive on the maintenance and repairs of your parking lot.
That sort of makes sense, and I hadn't considered the way that the fire truck on the invert is configured. That makes perfect sense to me. A question of curiosity, do you know the price range of these apartments, what they will rent for, and whether they will be affordable housing, or what the terminology you would use is having young families, which leads to another question about impact on the school. And that's one thing we consider too, is the impact not only on the roads, but the schools and the community. And 87 units, in your study, do you determine how many of those are young families with children?
Could potentially be served by this. And again, I do the engineering and the design part. I'm not the funding or the element of, exactly the units we're providing. We felt like workforce housing in the area, as I mentioned early on, was one of the important ideas with this project, to be able to live and work in close proximity to one another. Now, it doesn't guarantee where folks live and work, and it doesn't guarantee the pricing. The idea was to create a workforce housing with, and again, I get into the terms like fair market value, and what's affordable to this group might not be as affordable to this group. And doing a lot of design in Asheville, I know affordable housing is always pushed. And unfortunately, at the current stage, we haven't got into the details of cost of units and what they're going to cost. And everything is relative to construction costs. And if you've built anything lately, it's costing a bunch more just to get the materials. So I would hate to step out on a limb and try to guess.
Right.
So I would rather, leave that to the owner. No, I'm not sure any of us know the exact cost of these units, but I would assume that they're going to be similar to what's right next door. Otherwise, you're trying to compete with yourself on something like this. So I imagine they would be very similar to the units that are right next door, and similar costs and rents and opportunities for the live-work umbrella that we think is important.
Sure.
I can interject one thing from a memory of my first conversation with Cars Westgood at the beginning was one slight difference from this product versus the other complexes we've seen in the last few years is that this is 1 and 2 bedrooms almost exclusively. If I'm understanding, it's 1 and 2 bedrooms, whereas I think the bulk of the units in those other 2 were 3 bedrooms, which would suggest those are more family-oriented.
Right.
Everything that we've been talking about has been sort of pitched more in this workforce housing realm, that suggests, singles starting out with the 1 bedrooms or whatnot, maybe married couple starting their first child, So the impact on schools, I can confidently say, based on that current configuration, would be less.
Would be less than the apartments next door, certainly. And
I can't speak
that
for
makes
the
sense.
so yeah.
All right, thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, so on the one document that you provided, Eric, about the fact that the zoning or the current requirement of 50% brick or stone versus the pebble dash. I mean, I'm not a real huge fan of the pebble dash, but I guess I'm questioning that. And kind of a similar question as I compete with the train is: are all the retail buildings the same as this, or is just the ones on the front?
Well, the intent is to make them similar. Again, we're dealing with a schematic and a concept at this point. And, we drew shapes that were similar size, because it makes sense when you're building something, if you can be somewhat repetitive and create sort of retail shops that are similar in size and presentation to create that themed look. Now, again, I know I mentioned the Pebble Dash because what I should have said was a stone surface that, but it's hard for me to talk in architectural languages. That is, the intent is to create something that is attractive, and that's why we took the time to craft those elevations. And, beauty sometimes is in the eye of the beholder when it becomes Pebble Dash versus stucco, or, again, it's a look that we're trying to mix the materials to create that. It breaks up the facade, so to speak, so visually it just doesn't look monolithic, where you have a big one color apartment. This creates that element where it breaks it up visually for a presentation. And again, I think what's important is the different materials as opposed to a specific. And again, I know I'm the one that said Pebble Dash because I think that was what was thrown out to me by the architect. So.
I think in our definitions, when we put requirements of stone or brick, we have never discussed Pebble Dash, and that was the question that I had. Is that the same as masonry, like we consider stone and brick? Is it fall into that category, and is it left to interpretation? Is that what the intent that the board had when they put in stone or brick? And at this time, I'll recognize Eric. Eric can be clear about this definition.
Yeah, and I'll interject one thing too, because we are sort of overlapping into item 4, where we kind of veered away from the conditional zoning part of this. So these are good questions that we can touch base now and just, so the ordinance, the 50% brick or stone, I think ultimately it may not be explicit, but the brick is obvious. The stone, I have a feeling, like if you can picture the kind of big, large stone on the front of this building, for example, I think represents more of the aesthetic of the stone that we were going for, even though it probably didn't get written explicitly in there like that. It didn't necessarily address the Pebble Dash by name. Again, there was that clause written into the Article 5 Architectural Design Standards section for alternative design review, which basically gave the flexibility, knowing that there's like a wide range of architectural styles to choose from, that, if we see the renderings and it's ultimately something that meets the spirit and intent of those design standards, then you have the ability to approve that as part of the overlay review that we'll get to in item 4. But if there's an overall consensus of no, we want the brick or stone, then we certainly can steer it.
Okay, when we get to item 4, we'll open the floor to that discussion about the difference between the two and what it would be as far as design standards. Are there any other questions? Does anyone have anything else to ask before we move on to item 4? Item 3 does require a vote.
This would be ultimately, as I mentioned earlier, this part of it, the conditional zoning, would be a recommendation coming from this board to council that we would present in public hearing down the road.
All right. Is there anybody have any other questions or comments before we take a vote?
So just so I understand though, on the issue with the percentage of the Pebble Dash versus the brick, that will be part of this other discussion? That if
It'll be on number 4.
If we do approval of this, we can still come back on that.
Exactly.
The conditional zoning application would just be a matter of that northern portion as it relates to the apartments, and then the recommendation of whether or not to recommend the rezoning conditionally to.
And that has nothing to do with the business district, which is that one unit, was the only.
The commercial is, the aesthetic or the design of the apartments with all that brick shown, that certainly meets that 50% threshold from a design standpoint. So, but again, we're just talking about the conditional zoning part now.
Okay.
So we'll come back to design in just a
Sure.
moment. So.
All right, do I have a motion to approve this conditional zoning request?
I'll make that motion.
This motion has been made, so it's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Thank you all for your questions and comments and your thoughts on this issue. Now we'll move to item number 4 on the agenda. It's a Heart of Fletcher overlay design review of the commercial portion of the proposed mixed-use development at 3122 Michigan Road and the 3 adjoining parcels. At this time, I'd like to recognize their approval.
And one thing I want to interject about that I didn't mention a moment ago is that, again, I did say that an official public hearing would be held by council. We did send courtesy notices to abutting property owners just to let them know of this meeting happening tonight. But there will be, again, additional notifications sent to those abutting property owners ahead of the public hearing a couple weeks before that April meeting. And that's the point in time where the council would certainly welcome any kind of feedback or input from the public on that. So just for the benefit of anybody that might be in the audience tonight, that there will be additional notification. Coming back to the design standards, again, we've already sort of touched on a lot of it. Again, largely, these overlay standards for the commercial portion, this property is, on the commercial side, is located in a sub-precinct called Town Center Gateway, which was kind of envisioned to become sort of a gateway into that core center where we're sitting here. Just south of here, it transitions to something called Town Center Business, which has a little bit stricter standards. I will say that the submittal, the commercial portion, more closely follows the Town Center Business or the more stricter guidelines in the Town Center Gateway. They've got the buildings, you'll notice on that front row, pulled up closer to the highway. It's not just little skinny buildings with lots of space between the buildings. Their architectural design features will be addressed to face the corridor so that, the architectural features you won't see the tail end of those buildings with like the air conditioning units out back and forwards. So everything that we've seen, schematic, they've got the pitched roofs, that's one thing that is required, and that's more in the architectural design standards of the code, not just the overlay section. They've got the pitched roofs. Again, as we knew coming in, that discussion on Pebble Dash would be under the umbrella of alternative design review if you feel that it, and the color rendering shows it better than what's in your packet, is up for discussion. I mentioned that the look of the multifamily buildings does meet the Article 5 stuff about the multifamily residential, as well as our overlay guidelines on that. I can answer specific questions for you, and if we need to invite anybody else.
Curiosity, this pitched roof, that's pitched area, would that be a second story, or would that be?
These are not, I don't believe any of these are supposed to programmed into be two-story buildings, is that correct? That is correct. These are all three-story. Correct. Yeah, the multifamily is 3 stories, but the commercial are all 1 story.
1 story, because at some point we had talked about the 2-story.
That's
units
only
on
in the core section.
And I understand it's a different section, but not that, didn't know if the intent was the whole corridor or just.
No, it was just in that immediate core center where we're sitting in the, the potential project up on 25 right in the block right out in front of us would be more or less that area.
So none of these commercial buildings would house residential upstairs, none of them would all be.
And as Marty mentioned earlier, these are schematic. There is, and there is the possibility that, you know, they don't know who they're gonna lease to yet. Overall, we could, as long as this is generally the footprint of the commercial structures, you might see as they lease something, you know, where you see two buildings, they might get a user, a tenant that wants an entire building. So you might see the two buildings replaced by one, but that would largely follow the same design aesthetic. Major changes to the site plan, you know, configurations, whatnot, any changes to the design would ultimately need to come back for another look by the planning board. One note I'll say is that on that corner right there at the northernmost section, right at the corner of Baldwin Circle, they have a conceptual plan for a small restaurant. We know that restaurants often have their own corporate look depending on who they find. They may have a unique set of corporate-driven design standards that might have to be reconciled with ours. So that's the one I can most easily see having to come back, since we just don't know, and you know, it's hard to speculate that a restaurant would come in, you know, with that look necessarily. So unless it was some kind of small independent that they were leasing to. So you may see some components again at some point. Again, it just depends on ultimately if this gets final approval of council. There will be a lot more work ahead as far as the final engineering and full-blown engineered plans. So, but overall, I mean, I believe, you know, I'm not an architect. I mean, I know architecture is a subjective, taste-driven thing. I know one thing we were trying to get away from, like when we were crafting this, was like the vinyl siding look, obviously the metal building look. So I think the pebble dash coating is a suitable alternative, but we'll let you discuss that.
Right. And I know, the amount that material cost is influenced the decision on brick or stone or pebble dash. I know it probably doesn't cost as much as rock. In my mind, I look at the old buildings that are just stucco with rocks in it. That's what I see. And when I think of that, it's just small rocks in a stucco that's applied to lath, or how do you apply it? You know, it's a different material. But in the old buildings, they use wooden slats, the lath, and then they apply the stucco with the rocks in it. And is that a similar look in the design? Is that the material? It's just
And
concrete.
again, my experience is probably much like yours. I've seen the Biltmore Village area and the Williams and Sonoma building, which was done as one of the new examples of what it could look like. You know, I find that building itself attractive. You know, again, it's more of your taste, and I'm sorry, you know, in a sense, I'm sorry I said pebble dash. I think that architect said it to me like, oh, this could be pebble dash or some material, and it stuck in my head, and I said pebble dash. So I don't want, you know, you to be disappointed if it's not pebble dash and it becomes something that you find much more attractive. And again, it's hard to get into the weeds on something that is schematic and conceptual at this point, you know, because it still has to be considered on a lot further steps here, you know, through city council and then building costs and materials and, you know, what makes sense. I will promise you this, that the intent is to try to make these buildings attractive, not monolithic, and involve Eric in the process of the approval. If he feels changes are significant enough in a look to a building that is above and beyond what we've presented to you, then Eric can say, well, gosh, we want to bring this by for consideration, you know. So again, that's kind of where we feel like we don't know exactly. The intent was to try to show you what we were trying to create here, as opposed to you know, a picture as you paint it, it changes a little bit, or a building project that you're doing at your home, you find out that, wow, I could do the same thing with, you know, treated 6x6s as opposed to 4x4s, and it'll look a lot more attractive. And that's a decision that you make in the process. Can you afford those, and how do you do that?
Yeah, I know it certainly will be an impact on the cost. And back when we wrote the ordinance and we did this workshop on building design and standards, was nothing like today's prices, was nothing like what we're seeing going on today. You can't, you got to triple everything you thought about. And it's one of those deals, we want to work with you, but I really, in my mind, I didn't envision pebble dash as an alternative to stone or brick. I just something I didn't consider, because we were clear when we wrote it that that's what we want. We want stone or brick, and I know you can get brick and rock veneers that look like it's rock, but it's just a thin veneer that goes on, and it's actual thin slices of rock. But, that's, as one member of the board, is kind of the way I feel about it, but I'll listen to the rest of y'all.
I'm just gonna make a comment. The pebble finish is good, it has good aesthetics, but where I have seen in past is if you don't stay to what you wanted to start with, and you start moving away from it, you start setting a precedent. And as more development comes forward, you slip further and further away from what you wanted to start with. So I know we're in the preliminary stages, I got all that. But yeah, that would, if you want rock and brick, then you need to sort of stay rock and brick. Now, that doesn't mean it just doesn't look good, because I've been to Biltmore and I go there on a regular basis, but you gotta watch you don't slip down the slope and start just.
That's exactly right. It's my sentiments, exactly, not to compromise and then regret it. That's kind of the way I feel about it, but you had something you want.
Well, I just want to say, I go to Whitmore, I don't feel and see that, and I don't feel that meets what we've been trying to do here in Fletcher. Your stucco would be fine, next to you, but it wouldn't rock and brick, or rock and brick. And I would like to put a roof.
And one thing is that the requirement calls for 50% brick or stone, so in theory, if they modified it, they would not necessarily have to do it entirely. They could even leave some of the pebble dash.
Certainly, yeah, it would be a mixture.
So,
Right.
one thing I'll say about the review process again, because again, the conditional zoning has to go before council. This board has the final say on the design review. That part doesn't have to get reviewed by council. So there is time, you know, if you decide to either table the design and say, you know, try again, there is time built in with, you know, a March process or March opportunity to come in March or April. Or if they decided they didn't want to pay the architect for, you know, another nickel until they get to public hearing, potentially then after a public hearing before council, if it gets approved, then they could potentially, it's trying to throw out some options where they could then have the architect tinker with the drawings, bring them back even and say May.
Yeah, I certainly know it's an increase in cost, and it's always, every penny's a consideration, and you look at things and, well, that might not be a deal breaker, but it might affect the amount of landscaping we do, because we're spending so much more on building designs, but,
If I may make one more comment, in what I had said about the aesthetics of it, especially the stuff closer to the road.
Lee, could you speak into the mic?
Oh, I'm sorry, my bad. The aesthetics of it, especially the stuff closer to the road, I have seen over time that the road debris, whether it's a pollution or whatever the case may be, dulls that down. So you would definitely want to have a more durable situation along the roads, because the pollution simply wipes it all out to a certain degree. And I've had that happen in my own yard when I lived in Troutman across the street from the town hall. Every year I lost a row of trees. So that's going to also affect the building.
Certainly, and the types and whether they can handle that kind of a stressful environment. Thank you for that. Have y'all got anything you want to add?
You know, one other thing, and back to that point, I mean, that could be a compromise in terms of maybe just the front buildings have more brick, but the back buildings that are off the street.
The presentation from the road when people are driving by is going to be, they're not going to see what's back further, but what's right on the road is setting the tone for what people want to see downtown. That's just an opinion too.
And those design standards, they would have to be meant for the apartments to a degree.
Well, and the renderings shown are, I would say those facades are 50% brick. The corridor standards were always the most restrictive, never mind the overlay, but just the architectural design of the corridor. Like the apartments definitely meet the Article 5 design guidelines. The commercial is what's in question as far as under the overlay standards and the architectural design standards, Article 5 and the Appendix 2. That's what they were considering, what we were needing to consider under the alternative design review. And again, if this board is not comfortable approving that, then we can, my suggestion is you don't necessarily have to take action to deny it. You just simply would take no action and request that they bring revised drawing at a future date, and then we can work out the timing on that, whether they want to do it while it's in the review process with council or wait until council renders their decision to see if it's going to be.
Well, is it possible to make a recommendation with conditions, or do you think that might say on the trip?
Again, if you can be clear on it, and it's like obviously these guys might need to take. I would ask Marty what the preference is as far as do you need to communicate with FAR.
Well, what we want to do is we certainly want to meet the conditions of the ordinance that require 50% stone or brick, and we will meet that. And I can say across the board, we will meet or exceed the 50% requirement for stone or brick. And exactly how we do that is sort of yet to be determined. I mean, we have to put those pieces together. So we're not trying to avoid the 50% stone or brick rule. And again, we will meet that condition. Eric can verify that we will meet that condition. And if you're comfortable with that and handing off to Eric to say, make sure they meet that 50%, and we'll demonstrate to them how we do that. And again, that's a good point about the buildings maybe closer to the street, perhaps containing some additional design elements that create more of a sense of arrival into Fletcher as you're coming down the busy corridor. And again, those are all good points, and I can hear you loud and clear. We will meet that condition of 50% stone or brick or an acceptable material.
We'll put that in the bed then.
So yes, if it's based on hearing that, I would say, if you say approval contingent upon Eric receiving the revised drawings to show that, then we don't need to bring it back to you. I was just trying to get to the bottom of whether you want it.
Yeah, that's satisfactory, and if that's satisfactory with the board, I think we've got a consensus that that's the intent, and if they meet the intent of 50%, you can put the file up for, what I mean, that was a joke, It's okay, you meet the intent.
No, we want them attractive, just like you.
All right, is there any other questions or comments or any discussion? If not, we need to take a vote on this number 4, on the commercial portion. That request or recommendation, it will be rezoning or will be be the,
So you've already taken care of number 3, which was the recommendation on the conditional zoning. So for number 4, my suggested motion, then based on everything I've heard, would be is that the motion is to approve the Carter Fletcher overlay design contingent upon staff receiving revised drawings showing 50%.
and I appreciate you clarifying that, and
Mr. Chairman, I move that we, as articulated by Eric.
so you don't have to repeat it. And I could, I'm glad Eric's so knowledgeable, and he's so efficient. Thank you so much, Eric. All right, she's made a motion. Is there anybody with a second?
I'll say.
It's been moved in second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. I want to thank you all so much for your insight, your good questions, and your work on this. Also, I'd like to thank you guys for bringing this to us, and it looks like a very interesting project that we'd like to see. In the beginning, we were more inclined to apartments because we needed rooftops for retail. That was what the developers all told us. We need more rooftops. We need to do this to bring the retail opportunity. And you've done both here, so you got two in one step. And we appreciate that idea of mixed opportunity.
I just want to mention one more thing to interject too on that heels is like there was a bit of a frenzy over this general block of property for a couple month period as it was on the market under relisted circumstances. I had 3 separate inquiries prior to the Twice-Skins coming to me, where 3 separate inquiries were potentially moving where the entirety of this property was going to have been proposed to be all residential. Knowing that I can never officially speak for the planning board or for council, in so many words, I said probably a difficult an uphill battle at best on that proposal. And I had gone over what the town had done in recent years, very recent years, with regard to tweaking our land use plan and subsequently our zoning code to really, steer that density to these couple key pockets and preserve the corridor for commercial. And, again, I think the new members will, from having met with me individually prior to tonight, heard me say this, it's like, in kind of giving them a tour of the zoning map, Fletcher has done, probably more than most other jurisdictions with regard to keeping things or steering things towards slow, steady. We've, at this point now, probably removed the ability to do multifamily from, I'd say, over 90% of the jurisdictions. So.
I think we're saturated with multifamily, and at first, when I heard about this plan, I thought, well, everybody I talked to said, we've got too many apartments. It's just you need to start focusing on something different. And I think this right here, it fits the bill about trying to give us something a little bit more than just another group, because the questions I had about the impact on the school, the roads, all the things, the town, the cost of residential to the town, it's not even cost effective for having apartments just keep coming and coming. It's putting more of a burden on the town and the community, and I think this is a step in the right direction. I think it's something that we would encourage in the future, and we may have to look at the apartment issue going on in the town now. But I do like this project, and I'm sure I've got a consensus here. We really like what we see here, and ultimately it's up to the council. But as far as the planning board, I think this is something that it's not the same old slam apartments on us for rooftops. That's what we got in the past, and all the developers told us we didn't have enough, and so we kind of tried to get more. And now you see what we've got, and it's a nightmare on 25. I'm telling you, the traffic is ridiculous. It's not y'all's concern, it's DOT, but it's our thoughts that we have when we see apartments, that the impact it's having in the community. But, thank you so much for this vision and these ideas and this project. I think the council will like it too, but we do like it, and thank you so much for spending so much time with us on it. We appreciate you being thorough and bringing us all these designs, and it's what we're looking for. Thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome, and all of you. I appreciate your efforts and your patience with me presenting. Thank you.
We'll have to get you a long point.
I know.
One that you can hold on and stick in your pocket, telescoping like an antenna. That way you won't, you can just drop it. Did you have anything you wanted to add there?
No, just I'll say a word on number 5 here.
Okay. All right, there's no other comments on number 4. The next item on the agenda, you think we should give these guys time if they're going to leave, or is this going to be very long?
I don't think this will be very long, but if you'd like to take a pause.
Yeah, if y'all want to go ahead, I know you want to talk about, we're going to talk about future meetings, update on the situation. If you all want to go ahead and get your stuff, and so you guys sit through it.
Let me just mention one quick thing before I leave. Joe Smuster's dad, and I was board together. His dad, Carl, I coached him in baseball.
Really?
From the mother Linda, I just think the world of her. It's good people there.
I hope you ran him a good bit when he was on the team.
I wasn't good as a coach. I had much experience, but I had a lot of fun.
Good.
I know you don't remember me, but I was class of 75 at Robinson, the first rubber duckies, if you know what the rubber duckies are.
Now, I've heard of it, but I don't know. I'm with the Reynolds. My
You're
dad
a little
ran
bit
it.
younger, but in 75, they moved the Dallas Springs people to the high school, and they only had 7 grades at Dallas Springs, the 8th grade was at T.C. Robinson, and we got picked on 2 years in a row at Robinson. They called us rubber duckies. We were the worst. She looked at that, she went.
Yeah, I know what a road is.
She remembers. We'll take a 5-minute break here if you guys need, please. I'll call this meeting back over.
Yes, I was mentioning that we may likely have another vacancy with Lucas having mentioned that he was moving over the weekend, and I'm awaiting his official confirmation of that. It was just a very strange clipped message yesterday, so I will keep you posted on that. The next scheduled meeting dates would theoretically be March 15th, and then I wanted to give kind of advance notice to April meeting, which would normally be the 3rd Tuesday. I will be away that week and would be needing to make sure that if we have items submitted, that there will be no problem having the meeting on April 26th. So it's just something if you could check your calendars on. I've got a trip booked, so it's not really that flexible at this point, and it could be, given the track record, we may or may not have items submitted and we need to have a meeting, but just wanted to reserve April 26th for that month's meeting.
That's
Going on a cruise?
No, going to visit Darcy's brother in California.
if you're still there, because it's California.
Yes. And I'm sorry, I'm a bit scattered now, I'm really with like,
Get a hold of us.
See what, thank you for
Did you
listening.
get a hold of somebody?
Yeah, our public works director is on the way, so, yeah.
All right, is there any other thing you want to mention, any other comments? As a board, we got anything they want to? We recently discovered we don't have to have a motion to adjourn, we just get up and walk out. Meeting adjourned.